everything starts as an idea and everything starts as like us trying something new. And so, we limit ourselves by this idea that like we need to stay in the lane that we're in currently and that's all we can do because I think that all of us have so much more potential and so much more ability than we give ourselves credit for. And I think it's so important to kind of push yourself a little bit. It doesn't have to be huge, right? Like it can be those little shifts that I was talking about, but just to allow ourselves the ability to say like, what if I try something a little bit, even a little bit different than what I'm doing right now? Welcome to A Way of Thinking podcast. This podcast is dedicated to lighting the way towards greater inner peace and purpose. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Way of Thinking. I'm your host, Jessica Huang. And in today's episode, we will be talking all about the realm of possibility, why it's important, how we can get there, and remove some of those limiting beliefs that are holding us back from seeing other possibilities and moving ourselves into exploring our options. So tune in and we will be talking about that shortly. But before we dive in, I want to make a few quick announcements. So first off, I so appreciate every single one of you for tuning in and listening to this podcast. It means so much to me that people are enjoying the show, tuning in week after week. It is really incredible. And so if you are enjoying the show and you want to support all the effort that goes behind the scenes to make this show happen, you can do so by heading to my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com/donate, and donating a little bit to the effort that is this podcast. And thank you again so much for listening to this episode and all the other episodes that I put out. And so next is if you are interested, I have 3 different classes on Sundays now. So keeping myself very busy. But on Sunday mornings, I have 3 classes: psychic development, yoga nidra, and charging practice. And so if any of those are of interest to you, please reach out to me via my Instagram or on my website. And I would love to have you in class. And also, if you are someone that wants any help with being able to explore and be able to go into that realm of possibility and see what options there might be for you in your career, please go to my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com, and sign up for a free dream job discovery session with me so we can look into all the untapped potential that might be laying in front of you. So it would be my honor to help you explore and find your purpose and be able to see what might be out there beyond what you are doing today. So I invite you to book a session with me, and I hope to connect with you soon. Okay, now that we are through with the announcements, let's dive into today's show. So today's show is all about being in the realm of possibility and really unlocking all of our potential. And so why did this come up? So it was interesting. Yesterday, I was on a coaching call with a client of mine, and we were actually reflecting back to when I first started talking with her, like that initial dream job discovery session that I did with her, and just how closed off she was at that time. Like, and it was so funny because, I remember thinking back to that conversation, and in her mind, she had just gotten laid off from doing work that clearly was not something that she enjoyed doing. It was a job that kind of was draining all of her energy. And nevertheless, despite that fact, she was like, well, I'm assuming I'm going to go for another job that is similar of nature, right? Like, let me just move on to the next one was kind of the attitude. And and yet there was like this little spark, right? Like there was this little like glimmer that I was seeing where I would ask her like, well, what else could be out there, and just poking at the idea of what if it's not just the thing that you just came out of. And she talked about how much she loved art and how much she loved being creative and how she wasn't able to do any of that in her current job. But it was just this massive passion of hers. And so through the time that we've been working together, she now is really fully like focused on doing work that is aligned with being an artist, and being able to explore different opportunities that are in the creative realm. And even when she is doing work outside of that might be your more typical job, she's looking at options that are more aligned with creativity, right? And so it was really interesting, like going back and thinking about that initial conversation and her ability to look at her life and go, oh, I'm just going to stay in the framework of where I am already. Right. And now having unlocked all of that and just been able to explore possibility, it just was incredible to see the journey that she had made and how her entire mindset and ability of what she thought she was capable of had completely changed. And so that's the backdrop of why I wanted to have this conversation today is just really being inspired by my client and so many of my other clients and like watching them go on this journey. But it was really special, like seeing how far she had come and how important it is to not kind of pigeonhole ourselves in the space of where we are currently. And so that's why I want to talk about this whole idea of being in the realm of possibility. And so I I wanted, also for me personally, it definitely has been something that has been incredibly important, to see how my life has changed, from this time when I very, very similar to my client was just going from finance job to finance job, believing that, oh, maybe the next one will be better, right? Like maybe if I switch industries, maybe if I change, like I was making tiny pivots, which I think was good, right? Because it was helping me explore, like, maybe if I change this element, it would make me happier, and I think it's important to like do that exploration. But ultimately, I ended up having to find that much bigger pivot was necessary for me. And so I would say like, I think it's important big and small, right? Like there's like the ability to say like, let me do almost like micro adjustments, right? Like let me on a smaller scale say like, if I take what I'm doing right now and do like a smaller pivot, like change companies, change industries, change the role slightly, like can it get into more of something that would be more suitable to me, right? And then there's the bigger thinking of like, well, maybe sometimes that isn't going to work out and you need to make a much bigger shift than what you've been doing. And so I think it's important to look at like both options, right? Because we think that when one door closes, then another one opens is the phrase, right? But sometimes it's a window. And I think I've said this before, and I love that analogy because it's like, we think that it has to be kind of like a one for one oftentimes when we are exploring new opportunities. We think that, oh, well, since I've been doing XYZ type of work, like finance, like I need to just do another finance job at a different place and that'll be it. And for some of us that works, and for others of us, it requires a little more of a push towards the possibility of a window, right? The possibility that it is going to come in, what is really going to suit us is going to come in a completely different form than where we've been currently. And and while it is beautiful if someone has already found what it is that they want to do and they're like, this is my lane and I'm going to stick with it. sometimes we don't have that luxury, or sometimes we haven't found that right fit yet. Let me put it that way, right? Sometimes we are in a place where it is not it is not working out, right? Like that was how I felt for a very long time, and how many of my clients feel is like I've been trying this thing for in many iterations and many forms of those micro adjustments, and it is just not it, right? Like I don't want to see myself doing this for the next 20, 30 plus years, right? Like the idea that like we spend so much of our time in our jobs, and our careers are quite long, like there's a good amount of time that you're spending in your career. And so the idea that you don't want to be in that career for the rest of your life is something that is worth exploring, right? Because it's an awful long time to be miserable in something that is really not for you, right? And so I think it is important that to remember, like, yes, like explore those micro adjustments first, you know, because I think that's an important part of the process if that is something you want to do, right? Like for me, it's like it was important that I did try all those finance jobs because I think I needed to have that information for myself before I could make a much bigger leap. Because then I had all of this information and all this data, all these data points, right? Like I'm, definitely an analytical person by nature. And so for me, it was like I have all these data points. I have tried to make it work in the realm of finance, and I have firmly come to the conclusion that it is not for me. I needed to come to that place to realize like, oh, maybe it needs to be something else. So, yeah. And so, the reason why this is so important is because oftentimes, like, we will miss out on something that could be so much better for us because like closing ourselves off to where we are right now, right? So I like to think of it as like, what if, right? Like that is one of my favorite phrases, and I think in many ways it's what has led me to where I am right now. It's like, what if I tried to move out of finance? Like, what if I became a coach? Like, what if I started a podcast? Like where are we allowing ourselves that question of what if? Because the other side of that is that we are just stuck, right? Like, and I think a lot about this idea of like, what does it mean to be stuck? Well, when you're stuck, it means that like you don't have options in front of you that feel viable to you, right? When you're stuck, you're looking at it going like, well, I'm here in a place that I don't want to be, but I don't know where to go. And so I am just stuck. And so that's why this whole idea of realm of possibility is so incredibly beautiful and important, is because it is allowing ourselves to kind of unglue ourselves from where we are, right? Because when you're stuck, you're already saying like where I am right now, I don't like, right? Like where I am right now is not serving me. So going into the realm of possibility says, but there's all these other opportunities available to me. So now how do we do this? Like how do we really move ourselves into this realm of possibility? So one thing I like to think about is just this idea of like it's a lot of what is holding ourselves back is our belief system, right? So we have come to believe that we are capable of we're good at what we're doing, right? Or well, I mean, maybe you don't believe that, I don't know. But like we are comfortable. Let me put it that way. It's good or bad, we are comfortable where we are. And something that I think about a lot is how we will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Like I love that phrase. Like it's well, not that I love that phrase, but I think it's really important to think about that phrase, right? Like we will choose to stay where we are even when we don't like it, because we are comfortable there. Like it's in our comfort zone, right? Like that circle that we have put ourselves in to say like I am comfortable here, and even though I don't like it, it's like the devil you know, right? Like that's the idea behind it. And I think that this is something really important to notice about ourselves, right? It's like, are you choosing to be where you are because it is a comfortable hell for you versus the unknown, right? It's that fear of unknown that often like holds us back from pursuing other opportunities. And so I think it's really important to notice like, are you actually happy where you are? Like, yes, you are may be comfortable, but is this really where you want to stay? You know, like, do you really want to be in this in wherever you are right now? Because if the answer is no, then it is a worthy and necessary thing to start to unlock the ability to say like what else could be out there. And and so I think one of the important things is like it's all about like taking like working your way up, right? Like so taking smaller steps is always something that I would recommend because obviously we don't want like yes, I am definitely someone that has kind of dove off the deep end in certain ways. But I've done that because I did took a lot of smaller steps to get there, right? And so, for instance, like before I decided to leave my job and become a coach, I had explored like changing jobs within my company. I explored changing roles within my company. I explored changing companies. I explored changing industries. So there were a lot of like options that I explored first before I started exploring broader, right? And when I started exploring broader, it was, first it was like, oh, what is a more natural pivot from what I'm doing right now and exploring options like that. So, like, I had initially looked into going to become a financial advisor, like staying in the realm of finances, but in a different perspective, right? Or a totally different type of work, right? But in a more similar capacity before I end up deciding I wanted to become a coach. So it's I think that there's kind of like there's different levels in which we can kind of like move ourselves out into the realm of possibility. And so I think it's nice to kind of work your way out, right? So being able to explore from the place of like what would be like one step removed from where I am, and how does that make me feel? Like, does that seem more aligned to who I am and what I want to be doing or less? And so it's a lot around like working your way out of the circle. And because I think it is like building a muscle to be able to see these possibilities, right? So oftentimes we need to kind of like allow our brains to accept what we're offering, and it might take smaller like ideas to reach the one that might be the one for you. So allowing your brain kind of the processing time of saying like, okay, maybe we're going to think about something a little more removed from what we've been doing. How does that feel? And allowing ourselves to explore that. Because that is one of the things is like if we try and jump too far too fast, like our nervous systems can't really handle it, right? Like we get too worked up and then the fear becomes a little too much, and we won't allow ourselves to really explore those other options. And so it is really helpful to kind of like work your way out in terms of exploring those possibilities. And so, and then, another thing I want to talk about is just the way that we are kind of like defining ourselves, right? So I got a little tactical over there, but so in terms of, you know, just the way that we define ourselves, right? So one thing I want to make note of is that we often define ourselves by the work that we do, right? So like you go like I am Jessica Huang and I am a purpose coach, right? So like it becomes like it's an I am that is defining me, and all of these things about being a purpose coach are then defining me is like can be a way that we can do things, right? So like in the time that I was in finance, I would say like I'm Jessica Huang, I'm in finance. And at the time it kind of like had this roster of like criteria where it was like I am analytical, I'm good with numbers, I am good with working in Excel, like there were certain things that I kind of put on myself as like these defining elements based on the work I was doing. And on the flip side of that, there were certain elements that I had told myself that I was not capable of doing. So, a big one that I felt for a long time when I was working in finance is like, I am not creative, because it was like there were roles in the company that were considered the creative roles. So you had like graphic designers and like marketing to some degree. Like these other type of roles were considered like the more creative roles. And finance is considered like the not creative role, right? And which is not entirely true. Like there's definitely certain elements of creativity in finance as well. But it was something that what I was allowing to define me, right? Like I was allowing that to say like, well, because I'm in finance, I am no longer labeling myself as creative. And so I like to think of it as like we are so much more capable of just like different skill sets than what our skill set is in the particular role or the type of work that you do currently. And I think it's important to note, like, even if you've never tried some of these things, you don't know if you are you like not to box ourselves in too much, right? So, like, for instance, I was talking to another client of mine, and, she hasn't had the opportunity to be able to explore a lot of things, a lot of different types of skills or, things that maybe someone else would have explored like as a child, like my parents like had me try piano and put me in art class and put me in like dance class, like I was given that opportunity to like try all these different things. And but some people don't have that opportunity. And so I think the other thing is to remember, like, even if you've never done it before, doesn't mean that you can't, right? Because, it goes back to this idea that like we can't learn things after a certain point. Like, of course you can learn new things, I think it's hilarious like how much we think that like, oh, well, I only can do this type of thing. Like if it's something that really interests you, like sparks your interest, like why not try it? Like I think we have these like preconceived notions that we have to just stick in the lane that we are in. And I love the idea that like no, you don't have to do that. Like I think following your curiosity is one of the greatest things that we could possibly do for ourselves, which a lot of people are hesitant to do, right? Like it's um it's scary to follow your curiosity because you're trying something new, right? You're trying something that you haven't done before. And I did a whole podcast episode on this on the beginner's mind. So if you want to learn more in that, like in specifically trying a brand new thing, I would highly suggest listening to that episode as well. Because I think that it's so important, that ability to say like, I like of being okay with being of trying something new, of being a beginner, of failing forward, right? Like I like this idea of failing forward, and how if we if we don't if we don't try, if we're too afraid to fail, then we never try anything. And that is a disservice to us because we never know what could actually be a massive spark for us, right? Like if I never tried, I would not have this podcast. Like it's completely outside of my comfort zone or what I thought was my comfort zone, from when I was in finance. I certainly did not picture myself as someone that would start a podcast, 2 years ago. But trying it was completely worth it, right? Because here we are on episode 32 or 3 or something. And, and now it's like, it's something I absolutely love doing, and it's a hugely important thing, And so if I was afraid of trying, then none of this would exist, right? Like it is interesting, right? Like everything starts as an idea and everything starts as like us trying something new. And so, we limit ourselves by this idea that like we need to stay in the lane that we're in currently and that's all we can do because I think that all of us have so much more potential and so much more ability than we give ourselves credit for. And I think it's so important to kind of push yourself a little bit. It doesn't have to be huge, right? Like it can be those little shifts that I was talking about, but just to allow ourselves the ability to say like, what if I try something a little bit, even a little bit different than what I'm doing right now? And one more thing I want to talk about is like the the need to embrace uncertainty. So when we're in the realm of possibility, I think that it's interesting because there's the ability to look at it as exciting and there's the ability to look at it as terrifying. And there's this funny wonderful phrase from my coaching program that I think is really important in this moment, right? It goes, fear is excitement on pause. And I love this idea because essentially it's saying how like both of those things, so like when you feel fear and when you feel excitement, like they both kind of give you a similar physical feeling. So if we reframe our fears as excitement on pause, then it opens us up to this ability to say like, oh, like actually, what if that feeling of fear is actually just me being really excited, right? Like, what if it is actually really exciting what I'm afraid of, but like not that unlocks something within us, right? Like that allows us to go like, oh, let me try that. Like, let me like dive in instead of like holding ourselves back. So I think remembering that phrase is hugely important, right? The ability to say like, oh, well, I can, excitement and fear are two sides of the same coin. So when I feel the fear, I can turn it into excitement. And I think this is really important because it is natural to say like venturing into the unknown is not an easy thing, right? And going into uncertainty is certainly something that like we don't like, right? Like we like to know where we're going. I think for most people, maybe you're the type of person that's just like, woo, like let me just like try whatever. But I think for many of us, right, like we like to have an idea of like what's coming ahead of us and I understand that, right? And so I think it is important to learn to kind of settle into the idea of like that it's temporary, right? Like the at least in the realm of whatever it is that you are trying to figure out or trying to explore, like there will be a point where you are figuring it out, right? Like there was a good deal of time where I had absolutely no idea where I was going next. I was like, well, I don't really like maybe I go back into finance, like maybe I go into financial advising, like maybe I go into uh coaching, And so there was a good deal of time where like I just really didn't know. And and it was absolutely challenging, like, without a doubt. But I learned to settle into that discomfort and allowed it to excite me rather than terrify me. I allowed it to be like, but what if it is amazing that like I can move somewhere else? You know, like what if there is the ability for wherever I'm going to be so much better than where I've been, right? And I think that that is really important to note, like especially if you're in that stuck place. I think it's so important to think about like that realm of possibility to go like, oh, like there is going to be something out there that is better for me. I may not know what it is yet, but it does exist and I will find it. And I think holding on to a belief like that is what allows you to explore, right? Like it's like every time you explore, you are then taking one step further on that path, right? Because every time you explore, it is giving you more data points, it's giving you more information, right? Like if you try one of those half steps, like exploring that next job that is like more like a micro adjustment from where you are, well, that's giving you information, right? It is saying like, does this work for me? Yes or no. And it's yes and no, really, right? Like, yes, this is working for me in this way. Like it is allowing me to gain, I don't know, like to do more creative thinking, right? But it's not working for me because I am still in spreadsheets too much, like just as an example, right? So what you can do is as you're exploring, like you're taking in those kind of like data points. You're saying like, I like this element of this. This is working for me, but these other elements are not so much. And so let me take that in and assess like, is this going to work for me for the long haul? Like, are those no's like big no's that I'm like, nope, gotta keep moving? Or is it that I can keep going in this lane? Like, does this lane maybe work for me better, right? So I think that I love to look at it as like exploration as kind of like gaining, it's helping you gain more knowledge, right? Like it's helping you lose it it's not real, it's helping you move down your path in a way by gaining more data, and that will only serve you, right, in helping you find whatever it is that you are really looking for, because otherwise we are just staying where we are, and we already know that staying where we are is not serving us. And I think it's super important to really come to terms with that fact. Like, I feel like that's something that's so important, is to really look at where you are right now and go like, is this really serving me? And so then being able to take these little pieces of action and moving ourselves forward, it is just giving us ourselves more information to then find the place that we really want to be. So that's the thing, is like, remember, like the uncertainty is temporary. The exploration is also temporary, like you will, I mean, we're always like moving a little bit forward, moving a little forward, trying to find something that really is better for us. And, it is a continuous journey, but how can we be excited about that instead of afraid, right? Like looking at that as like, it's amazing to think of like, I can go somewhere that's going to be better than where I am right now, because it is out there and it's waiting for you. It is, right? And I think that's so important to remember, right? Like the thing that you are really suited for is waiting for you. Like the people that you can help in whatever that it is that you're meant to do, it's waiting for you, because that's where you are actually going to step into your, what I've been thinking of as like your zone of genius, right? Like we all have those things that like these natural gifts and these natural talents that I think we're meant to explore and really be able to hone in on and utilize and be able to do work that like brings us joy and happiness and feels like it feels right, right? Like it doesn't have to be so hard. So I hope that can inspire you a little bit to open yourself up a little bit more to that realm of possibility, because whatever it is that you are looking for, it's out there. And, there's this Rumi poem that I really love, and it says that what you seek is seeking you. And it's a phrase that I come back to over and over again, because I I firmly choose to believe that that is true. Like, what I seek is seeking me. And so it is like, the universe is coming towards you, but you have to step towards it as well. And so to me, it's taking those little steps and those little actions to move in the direction of what is really right for you. One more thing I wanted to say, lots of quotes today, but I've been reading The Alchemist, or actually I just finished it, and it's such a wonderful book. I feel like it was definitely like meant for me to read it. It's all about really like pursuing your purpose, or as they call it, like your legend. And there's this quote I pulled out of the book that I wanted to share, and it says, "There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure." So I want you to remember that and end on that note, that it is just our fear of failure that is holding us back from the dreams that we have, from that realm of possibility and the ability to really go for what it is that we really want. And so I hope that this helps you unlock a little bit of that and step a little bit past that fear and into excitement, and explore what is really meant for you. So I hope that this episode was helpful to you, and I hope that you can look for those windows, right? Like, I love that idea, like looking for those opportunities that were maybe a little outside the box and outside of what you naturally would think of for yourself. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that you will continue tuning in, and I will see you next time.